Brenda Hawthorne destroyed my $3,200 custom gate 3 times in 1 month. The 4th time, she destroyed her own $47,000 Escalade instead. The crunch of splintered cedar under my boots told the whole story, but this time I had her on camera. There was the HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood queen backing up her silver Escalade for what she thought would be another triumphant ramming run through my flimsy wooden gate. The metallic taste of sweet revenge filled my mouth as I watched her gun it at 40 miles per hour, completely unaware that my new gate wasn't the cedar planks she destroyed before. Every single time this woman thought she could just keep driving through my property whenever she pleased, treating my gates like tissue paper. She had no idea she was about to drive straight into the most expensive lesson of her entitled life. What would you do if your neighbor kept driving through your property? My name is Jake Kowalski, and 6 months ago, I thought the worst thing that could happen to a man was losing his wife to cancer. Turns out I was wrong. The worst thing is having some HOA princess decide your grief therapy needs to match her Pinterest board. 3 years back, pancreatic cancer took Sarah. 27 years of marriage gone in 6 brutal months. I was drowning in a house that still smelled like her lavender shampoo, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do with the rest of my life. That's when Uncle Frank's lawyer called about the inheritance. 12 acres in Ridgewood, complete with a 1952 farmhouse and more peace than I'd known existed. The catch: some developer had built McMansion land around Frank's property in the 90s. But here's the beautiful part. My easement was recorded in 1952, decades before the first suburban princess planted her first decorative cabbage. I bought 6 rescue cattle, not for farming, for sanity. After Sarah died, taking care of something living kept me from eating my service pistol. These weren't livestock. They were therapy animals with hooves. Then I met Her Royal Highness. Picture this. I'm out feeding the cattle on a crisp October morning when this cream-colored tornado comes clicking up my driveway in heels that could puncture concrete. Brenda Hawthorne, HOA president and self-appointed queen of suburban perfection. The woman looked like she'd been assembled in a factory that only made uptight real estate agents. "Mr. Kowalski," she purred, extending a hand that had clearly never touched anything rougher than Egyptian cotton. "Welcome to the neighborhood." The way she said neighborhood made it sound like a threat. "I have some concerns about your agricultural activities." She had my cattle like they were hosting a meth lab. The smell of fresh manure hung in the morning air, apparently not on her approved scent list. I stayed polite, showed her the easement paperwork, explained the legal situation, even offered to build a prettier gate. Spent $3 grand and 100 hours crafting something worthy of a magazine cover. Hand-welded steel frame with cedar planks, smooth as butter, tight as a drum. Brenda examined it like I'd offered her a dead fish. How rustic. That should have been my first clue she wasn't planning to coexist peacefully. See, Brenda lived in an 8,000 square foot monument to her own ego. Every blade of grass stood at attention. Every flower bed looked like it had been arranged with tweezers. Her silver Escalade gleamed like a weapon, and rumor had it she'd flipped 3 houses in the subdivision, always selling right after the HOA passed some new rule that magically increased property values. To Queen Brenda, my humble cattle operation wasn't just an eyesore. It was a direct assault on her real estate empire. And when someone threatens Brenda's money, diplomacy dies. The first attack came on a Tuesday morning in September. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when I heard the sound of pure entitlement approaching, the distinctive roar of an Escalade engine being pushed beyond reason. Through my window, I watched Her Majesty back up for a running start, then gun it straight through my beautiful gate like she was breaking through tissue paper. The sound of splintering cedar echoed across the pasture like a gunshot. My $3,000 of craftsmanship scattered like expensive confetti while my cattle scattered to the far fence, spooked by the violence. I walked outside, coffee still in hand, and surveyed the carnage. Brenda sat in her pristine SUV, engine idling, staring at me through the windshield with the kind of smile that says, "What are you going to do about it?" "Morning, Brenda," I called out. "Looks like you missed the latch." She didn't find it funny. just threw the Escalade in reverse and drove away, leaving me standing in the wreckage of what used to be a gate. That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a neighborly disagreement. This was war, and I was about to teach a suburban princess that some old dogs know tricks she'd never learned in real estate school. 3 days later, I found a certified letter in my mailbox that made my morning coffee taste like battery acid. Notice of emergency HOA board meeting in bold red letters, scheduled for that Thursday at 10 a.m. Prime time for when anyone with an actual job would be working. The agenda was a masterpiece of bureaucratic warfare, discussion of safety violations and non-compliant structures threatening community welfare. Translation: how do we legally screw Jake Kowalski? I showed up anyway, walking into the community center like I was entering hostile territory. The smell of stale coffee and expensive perfume created a toxic cloud that made my sinuses burn. Brenda held court with her 5-person board of suburban generals, every one of them looking like they'd been ordered from the same catalog of aggressively beige middle management. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Brenda announced, not even glancing in my direction. Her voice had that particular pitch that reminded me of air brakes failing on a loaded semi. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that would have made Stalin weep with pride. Photos of my gate from 17 different angles, complete with measurements and what she called sightline obstructions. The woman had turned property harassment into a science project. After consulting with our attorney, she continued, "We're implementing an emergency safety regulation requiring all access barriers to be easily removable by emergency personnel." Board member number 3, a guy whose hands were so soft they practically glowed, nodded like she just announced the cure for cancer. "We simply can't allow private convenience to override community safety." I raised my hand. "Can I see that attorney consultation?" Brenda's smile could have frozen motor oil. "That's privileged information, Mr. Kowalski." The vote was unanimous, shocking absolutely no one except maybe the houseplants. I had 30 days to make my gate easily removable or face $500 daily fines. Sarah used to say that when people gang up on you with fancy words and official papers, they're usually trying to hide something simple and ugly. She was right, as usual. Walking out, the crunch of gravel under my boots sounded like grinding teeth. But here's what Queen Brenda didn't know about old mechanics. We don't just fix things that are broken. We research them until we understand every bolt, wire, and connection. The next morning found me at the county courthouse, a brick building that smelled like old paper and decades of bureaucratic victories. The records room was in the basement, presided over by Martha Gonzalez, who'd been filing property deeds since before computers existed. "Jake Kowalski," she said, looking up with eyes sharp as fresh razor wire. "I remember your Uncle Frank. Good man. Heard you were having some trouble with those fancy folks up the hill." I spread my situation out like a broken transmission, and Martha went to work with the patience of a master mechanic and twice the precision. We pulled every document related to my property going back to 1952, cross-referenced HOA and corporation papers, and dug into county regulations like we were hunting for a blown gasket in a Peterbilt engine. 3 hours later, Martha leaned back and whistled low. "Well, I'll be damned. My easement wasn't just recorded in 1952. It came with specific language about permanent access rights in perpetuity, not subject to modification by subsequent property development." Uncle Frank had been smarter than anyone gave him credit for. Back when I was learning to rebuild carburetors, old-timers like him were already thinking 3 moves ahead of developers and their legal tricks. But the real gold mine was tucked in a margin of the original subdivision plat. Easement predates development. Cannot be modified without consent of easement holder. Martha tapped the document with one weathered finger. "Honey, your HOA just stepped in it with both feet wearing concrete boots. They can't regulate what they don't control, and they sure can't fine you for rights that were established when their subdivision was still a cornfield." I walked out feeling like I'd found the key to Brenda's kingdom. Sarah always said the best defense against bullies was knowing more than they did about their own game. Turned out she was right about that, too. The sound of my truck engine turning over felt like the first note of a victory song. But this was just reconnaissance. I had a feeling Brenda's next move would make her gate ramming look like a gentle suggestion, and I wanted to be ready with more than just property law when she came calling again. Armed with my legal ammunition, I figured Brenda might back down like any reasonable person faced with ironclad property law. Shows what I knew about reasonable people. Instead of retreating, the woman doubled down like a gambler with someone else's money. Within a week, she'd launched Operation Make Jake's Life Hell. Every morning at exactly 7:15 a.m., there was Brenda with her camera photographing my cattle like she was documenting war crimes. The click of that shutter became my new alarm clock. Then came the bogus complaints to county code enforcement, the whispered rumors about diseased livestock, the whole suburban warfare playbook. That's when I decided it was time to build something special. While Brenda was busy playing amateur photographer, I was in my workshop designing what I'd come to call Supergate 2.0. The smell of welding flux and cutting oil filled the barn as I sketched out plans that would have made my old shop teacher proud. The concept was beautiful in its simplicity. Make it look exactly like the wooden gate she'd already destroyed, but build it around a steel skeleton that could stop a freight train. Wood grain vinyl wrap over reinforced steel tubing designed to splinter dramatically on impact while the real structure held firm. My buddy Roy came by to help install the surveillance system and caught me test-fitting steel components behind wooden facades. He whistled low, running his fingers along the hidden framework. "Brother, that's not a gate," he said with genuine admiration. "That's a lawsuit waiting to happen for her." The engineering was the fun part. I calculated impact forces, designed crumple zones that would absorb energy while transferring maximum shock back to the attacking vehicle, and created breakaway sections that would make it look like the gate was destroyed while keeping the core structure intact. But the real breakthrough came when I was positioning cameras to capture the perfect angles. Through the telephoto lens, Roy spotted something that changed everything. "Jake, you seeing this?" Brenda's landscaping crew was dumping wheelbarrows of yard waste into the wetlands behind her palace. The same federally protected wetlands that came with fines measured in tens of thousands of dollars. I grabbed my camera and started documenting. Over 2 weeks, I caught them dumping grass clippings, tree trimmings, and what looked like pool chemicals into protected habitat. Sarah used to volunteer with environmental groups, so I knew exactly how serious this was. Every violation got photographed, time-stamped, and uploaded to 3 different cloud services. The irony was perfect. While Brenda documented my legal cattle operation, she was creating a federal crime scene in her backyard. Meanwhile, I kept working on the gate. The hardest part was making the steel core invisible. I used aircraft cable to connect impact points, designed the wooden facade to splinter in spectacular fashion, and tested the whole system with a spare bumper from Roy's junkyard. The test was beautiful. The wood exploded like a movie special effect. The steel held firm, and the bumper crumpled like aluminum foil, but to anyone watching, it would look like the gate had been completely destroyed. That's when Tom Patterson knocked on my door with a 6-pack and a story that made my week. Tom was a retired history teacher who lived 3 houses down from Queen Brenda. Quiet guy, but he'd been watching this drama with the eye of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with classroom bullies. "She tried the same thing with the Hendersons 2 years ago," he said, settling into my kitchen chair. "Harassment, bogus violations, the whole 9 yards. They sold and moved to Florida just to escape her." The taste of beer turned bitter as the pattern became clear. This wasn't personal. It was business. Brenda systematically terrorized families until they sold below market value, then flipped their properties for profit. 3 other families in 5 years, Tom continued. Always the same playbook. Always ends with people running away from their own homes. That night, I put the finishing touches on Supergate 2.0. The wooden exterior looked identical to the original. Same cedar planks, same stain, same hardware. But underneath lurked enough steel to stop a charging rhino. I installed it at dawn, making sure every joint was perfect, every cable tension just right. The motion sensors were calibrated to start recording 30 seconds before impact. Multiple angles would capture everything in high definition, and cloud backup would preserve evidence even if local equipment was destroyed. The gate looked innocent as a Sunday school picnic. Brenda would see the same wooden barrier she'd already destroyed twice. She'd back up for another victory lap, gun that escalade to ramming speed, and discover that some lessons come with a price tag measured in twisted metal and shattered pride. I stepped back to admire my work. The morning dew made the wooden facade glisten like it was fresh from the lumberyard. Perfect camouflage for 30,000 pounds of impact resistance. All I had to do now was wait for Her Majesty's next drive-by lesson in property rights. With Supergate 2.0 installed and cameras rolling, I thought I'd earn a breather while Brenda plotted her next move. Should have known better. The woman had apparently decided that subtlety was for people who didn't drive luxury SUVs as weapons. Her master stroke arrived Friday afternoon. A certified letter announcing a special assessment emergency meeting for the following Tuesday. The agenda made my coffee taste like motor oil. Proposed special assessment, $2,000 per household to fund immediate legal action against ongoing property violations threatening community welfare. $2,000 per family to pay lawyers to sue me for the crime of existing in their perfect subdivision. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. Tuesday. Working hours ensuring maximum attendance from retired folks with nothing better to do than vote away their neighbors' rights. But here's where Brenda made her biggest mistake yet. She'd gotten greedy, and greedy people make sloppy moves. The smell of fresh ink filled Tom Patterson's garage as we printed flyers explaining the real legal situation. Tom knew how to break down complex information. 40 years of teaching high school history teaches you that people make better decisions when they understand what's actually happening. Most folks in this subdivision are decent, he said, feeding another sheet through his ancient printer. They just don't know Brenda's been selling them fairy tales about HOA authority. We distributed those flyers anonymously over the weekend, sharing simple facts. My easement predated their subdivision by 4 decades. The HOA couldn't regulate pre-existing rights, and homeowners were about to fund a lawsuit that couldn't possibly succeed. By Monday morning, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Turned out a lot of people had questions about mortgaging their kids' college funds to harass a neighbor who was following the law. But while I was building community support, I was also setting a much more personal trap. That Monday evening, I made sure Brenda could see me loading something large and metallic into my truck bed, just visible enough through her telephoto lens to pique her curiosity, not clear enough to identify. Then I drove to the far end of my property, parked behind the barn where her cameras couldn't follow, and waited. Sure enough, within 20 minutes, I heard the distinctive purr of an Escalade engine getting closer. Through my workshop window, I watched Her Majesty creep along the property line, trying to get a better angle on whatever mysterious project I was supposedly working on. Perfect. Let her think I was installing something new, something that might give her fresh ammunition for her legal crusade. But the real bait wasn't what she could see. It was what she couldn't resist doing about it. Tuesday morning arrived with that electric feeling you get right before storm breaks. I fed my cattle extra early and positioned my truck strategically in the pasture beyond Supergate 2.0, making it look like I was deliberately blocking her access to the scenic road she'd been using as her personal shortcut. The gate itself looked innocent as Sunday morning. Same cedar planks, same stain, same hardware she'd already destroyed twice. But underneath that wooden facade lurked enough reinforced steel to stop a freight train, with cameras positioned to capture every beautiful second of impact. At 9:45 a.m., I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when I heard it. The sound of expensive German engineering being pushed beyond its design limits. Through my window, I watched Brenda's silver Escalade approach my gate with the determination of a guided missile. She'd taken the bait completely. There was her precious SUV, backing up for what she clearly thought would be another triumphant demolition of my flimsy wooden barrier. The woman was so focused on her target that she never noticed the nearly invisible aircraft cables connecting impact points, or the way morning sunlight glinted off steel edges hidden beneath wood grain vinyl. I grabbed my coffee and walked outside, timing it perfectly to arrive just as she finished positioning for her attack run. Through her windshield, I could see that familiar expression of smug satisfaction. The look of someone who thinks they're about to win a game that don't even understand they're losing. "Morning, Brenda," I called out cheerfully, raising my coffee mug in a friendly salute. "Beautiful day for a drive, isn't it?" She didn't respond, just shifted in a drive and gunned it. The Escalade surged forward with the confidence of a vehicle that had never met an obstacle it couldn't bulldoze through. That was about to change. The sound of 8 cylinders at full throttle mixed with the crunch of gravel as she built up speed for what she clearly thought would be her most satisfying victory yet. 20 yards. 15. 10. I took a sip of coffee and smiled, knowing that in about 3 seconds Brenda Hawthorne was going to learn the difference between appearances and reality in the most expensive way possible. Some lessons you just can't teach with words. The impact was everything I'd engineered it to be and more. Supergate 2.0 performed like a precision instrument built by someone who'd spent 30 years understanding what happens when unstoppable arrogance meets immovable physics. The wooden facade exploded in a shower of cedar splinters that looked absolutely devastating on camera, creating the perfect illusion of destruction while the steel core held firm as bedrock. But Brenda's Escalade, that told a very different story. The sound was magnificent, a symphony of crumpling German engineering, shattering safety glass, and the distinctive hiss of $40,000 worth of luxury SUV discovering the harsh reality of Newton's laws. Her front end accordion like she'd hit a mountain at 40 miles per hour, which from a physics standpoint, she basically had. Steam rose from her destroyed radiator while airbags deployed with the satisfying pop of consequences finally arriving. The smell of antifreeze mixed with burnt rubber and shattered pride filled the morning air like the sweetest perfume I'd ever encountered. I strolled over at a leisurely pace, coffee still steaming in my hand, savoring every second of this beautiful Tuesday morning. Brenda sat stunned behind her deployed airbags, staring at the wreckage of her intimidation machine through a spiderwebbed windshield. "Gosh, Brenda," I called out with genuine neighborly concern. "Looks like you missed the latch again. Hope you're okay in there." She turned to glare at me through the safety glass, her perfectly styled hair now looking like she'd stuck her finger in a light socket. You planned this," she sputtered, fumbling for her phone with shaking hands. "Plan what?" I asked innocently, gesturing at my gate, which had already swung back in a perfect position, looking barely scratched. A few decorative wood chips scattered on the gravel were the only evidence anything had happened. "I just built a gate. You're the one who keeps trying to drive through it." That's when the beauty of modern technology revealed itself. For security cameras had captured every glorious second in high-definition detail. Brenda backing up for her attack run, the deliberate acceleration, the moment of impact, and now her sitting in smoking wreckage, contemplating the relationship between actions and consequences. More importantly, those cameras proved this wasn't an accident. This was premeditated property destruction caught in crystal clear detail with surround sound audio of her creative vocabulary. While Brenda contemplated her new reality, I called 911. "There's been an accident on my property," I reported in my most concerned citizen voice. "A neighbor drove through my gate and damaged her vehicle. She might need medical attention." By the time the paramedics and sheriff's deputy arrived, half the neighborhood had gathered to witness Brenda's most expensive lesson in property rights. Tom Patterson stood at the edge of my driveway with a satisfied smile, watching justice served with German precision engineering. The deputy took one look at the scene and started asking obvious questions like why someone would ram a luxury SUV through a closed gate at ramming speed, and whether this might be part of a pattern of harassment. Brenda tried claiming my gate was a booby trap, but security footage doesn't lie. It showed a woman deliberately positioning for maximum impact, accelerating with clear intent to destroy property, and discovering that some obstacles fight back. The insurance investigator who arrived later was even less sympathetic. Intentional destruction voids coverage faster than you can say comprehensive policy. Brenda was facing $47,000 in replacement costs, medical bills, and whatever legal consequences came from committing vehicular assault on camera. Meanwhile, my damaged gate needed exactly $200 in cosmetic wood panels. As the tow truck hauled away Brenda's automotive pride and joy, I stood watching the most expensive temper tantrum in subdivision history disappear around the corner. But something in her eyes, as they loaded her into the ambulance, told me this war was far from over. In fact, I had a feeling the real battle was just beginning. If I thought Brenda's automotive encounter with reality would humble her into retreat, I clearly hadn't been paying attention to her character for the past 6 months. A normal person might have taken a hint. Brenda doubled down like a poker player with a losing hand and her kids' college fund on the table. Within 48 hours of her Escalades date with Destiny, my mailbox was stuffed with more legal threats than a mob lawyer's filing cabinet. Cease and desist orders, demands for property modification, threats of criminal charges for assault with a deadly gate. Apparently, Brenda's insurance company had referred her to an attorney who specialized in creative interpretations of property law. But here's what Queen Brenda didn't understand about old mechanics. We don't just build things to last. We document everything, keep every receipt, and always have a backup plan for when the primary system fails. Time to assemble my own legal dream team. The first call went to Susan Runn, a retired corporate attorney who lived 2 streets over and had been watching this whole drama unfold with the professional interest of someone who'd spent 40 years dismantling bad legal arguments for a living. Susan had offered her services after witnessing Brenda's spectacular crash landing, and her eyes lit up like Christmas morning when I spread my evidence across her kitchen table. "Oh, this is beautiful," she murmured, reviewing months of documented harassment, property destruction, and Brenda's pattern of intimidating neighbors into selling below market value. She's handed us a harassment case that practically prosecutes itself. The smell of Susan's jasmine tea mixed with the satisfying rustle of legal documents as we organized our counterattack. Criminal charges for property destruction, civil litigation for harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress, and a formal complaint to the State Real Estate Licensing Board for abuse of fiduciary duty. But the crown jewel was the environmental angle. Roy had helped me compile a digital portfolio of Brenda's wetland violations that would make an EPA investigator weep with joy. 8 months of documented dumping, complete with GPS coordinates, timestamps, and photographic evidence of federal environmental crimes that carried penalties measured in tens of thousands of dollars per incident. She's not just facing financial ruin, Susan explained with the satisfaction of a master craftsman admiring fine work. She's looking at potential criminal charges, professional license revocation, and enough civil liability to bankrupt a small country. The taste of victory was sweeter than Sarah's apple pie as we filed papers that would turn Brenda's world upside down. But legal warfare was just one front in this campaign. Tom Patterson had been busy. Motion-activated cameras now covered every approach to my property with cloud backup that would preserve evidence even if local equipment was destroyed. We turned my 12 acres into the most thoroughly documented piece of real estate in 3 counties. But the real game changer came when Martha from the county courthouse called with information that made my week. "Jake, honey," she said, her voice crackling with excitement. "You need to get down here and see what I found in the old incorporation files." What Martha had discovered was a legal landmine that would detonate right under Brenda's feet. When Ridgewood Estates was originally developed, the paperwork transferring common area ownership from the developer to the HOA had never been properly recorded. For 8 years, Brenda had been collecting assessments and wielding authority over property the HOA didn't actually own. Every fine, every rule change, every assessment was potentially invalid. The HOA existed in a legal gray area that made their enforcement actions about as legitimate as monopoly money. "She's been running a shadow government," Susan explained when I brought her the documents. "Collecting real money based on fictional authority. That's fraud, Jake. Criminal fraud." The pieces were falling into place like a perfectly tuned engine. Brenda wasn't just facing consequences for her gate-ramming adventure. She was looking at the complete dismantling of everything she'd built her petty empire on. That evening I sat on my porch, watching my cattle graze in the golden hour light, planning our final assault on Queen Brenda's kingdom of suburban tyranny. The sound of evening birds mixed with the gentle lowing of contented livestock, creating a peaceful soundtrack for what was about to become the most satisfying legal demolition in county history. Sarah used to say that patience and preparation were the most powerful weapons against bullies. Tomorrow, we'd find out just how right she was. You'd think a rational person facing criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and professional license revocation might consider the benefits of strategic retreat. But as I was learning, rationality and Brenda Hawthorne occupied different zip codes entirely. Her response to our legal carpet bombing was to go completely off the rails. It started with the 3 a.m. phone calls, heavy breathing, hang-ups, and what sounded suspiciously like someone trying to disguise their voice while making vague threats about accidents and consequences. My caller ID showed block numbers, but the timing was too convenient to be random. Sarah had dealt with similar harassment during her cancer treatment from some insurance bottom feeder, so I knew the drill. Document everything, stay calm, and let crazy people create their own evidence. Then came the private investigator. I first noticed him on a Tuesday morning. A guy in a beige sedan parked across from Tom's house, trying to look casual while photographing everyone who visited my property. The smell of surveillance was unmistakable to anyone who'd spent time in the military. And this joker had all the subtlety of a neon sign in a graveyard. Roy spotted him too and decided to have some fun. Within an hour, we had the PI's license plate, employer information, and enough photographs of him photographing us to start our own surveillance scrapbook. Turned out Brenda was paying Premium Investigations LLC $300 a day to dig up dirt on the neighborhood mechanic who'd had the audacity to build a gate that fought back. But the real comedy gold came when the PI approached Tom with a business proposition. I'll pay you $500 cash for any information about Jake Kowalski's illegal activities, he told Tom during what he probably thought was a covert conversation at the mailbox. Drug dealing, tax evasion, anything that might be useful in a legal proceeding. Tom, bless his retired teacher heart, played along beautifully. Well, I did see him working in his garage at unusual hours, he said with just the right amount of conspiratorial whisper. Lots of welding, strange chemicals, meeting with suspicious characters. The PI's eyes lit up like he'd struck gold. What he didn't know was that Roy had equipped Tom with a wire, and every word of that conversation was being recorded for potential evidence of harassment, attempted bribery, and whatever other charges Susan could dream up. Meanwhile, Brenda's desperation was manifesting in increasingly public ways. She'd started showing up at county commission meetings, HOA conferences, even the local Rotary Club, spinning wild tales about dangerous extremists who were terrorizing law-abiding homeowners with booby traps and illegal surveillance. The woman was developing a reputation as the neighborhood crazy lady, but she was too far gone to notice. Her social media presence became a daily source of entertainment. Facebook posts about property terrorists and illegal agricultural operations that violated everything from zoning laws to the Geneva Convention. Her own HOA board members started distancing themselves, with 2 resignations and 1 formal request for a mental health evaluation. But the crown jewel of her self-destruction came when she decided to take matters into her own manicured hands. I was in my workshop one evening putting finishing touches on a new cattle feeder when Roy's security system lit up like a Christmas tree. Motion sensors, perimeter alarms, and camera alerts all triggered simultaneously, indicating someone was approaching my property from the wetland side. The blind spot Brenda thought existed in my surveillance network. Through night vision cameras, we watched Her Former Majesty creeping through the marsh behind my property, carrying what appeared to be a crowbar and a can of spray paint. The irony was delicious. She was trespassing through the same federally protected wetlands where she'd been dumping illegal waste for months, apparently planning some kind of midnight vandalism operation. "This is better than Netflix," Roy whispered, watching the live feed from my kitchen. "She's about to commit multiple federal crimes on camera." We let her get close enough to start spray painting terrorist on my barn wall before I flipped on the exterior floods and triggered the motion-activated recording system. Brenda froze like a deer in headlights, caught red-handed with evidence of trespassing, vandalism, and criminal mischief literally dripping from her fingers. Evening, Brenda. I called out from my back porch, coffee mug in hand, doing a little late-night decorating. She dropped the spray can and ran, stumbling through the marsh in designer heels while motion-activated cameras captured every graceful moment of her retreat. The sound of expensive shoes meeting swamp mud was music to my ears. But her midnight adventure had consequences beyond just ruining a perfectly good pair of Jimmy Choos. Those cameras had recorded her committing multiple felonies in federally protected wetlands while already facing criminal charges for property destruction. Susan was practically giddy when she reviewed the footage. She just handed us grounds for a restraining order, additional criminal charges, and enough evidence to ensure she never holds another real estate license in this lifetime. The taste of morning coffee had never been sweeter as I watched Brenda's empire crumble one midnight felony at a time. Some people just can't help but dig their own graves deeper. If Brenda's midnight vandalism spree was rock bottom, she apparently had a shovel and wasn't afraid to use it. The restraining order Susan filed Monday morning should have been a wake-up call for anyone still clinging to their last threads of sanity. Instead, Brenda treated it like a personal challenge issued by the universe itself. Her response was to hire what I can only describe as the legal equivalent of a demolition crew. 3 lawyers from some downtown firm that specialized in aggressive litigation strategies, which in plain English meant they'd sue their own mothers if the retainer check cleared. The smell of desperation mixed with expensive cologne filled the community center Thursday morning when Brenda's legal dream team announced their intention to file a federal lawsuit claiming my property violated everything from disability access laws to international treaties on agricultural trade. They'd apparently spent 72 hours combing through every regulation ever written, looking for something, anything, that might stick to my perfectly legal cattle operation. But here's the beautiful thing about hiring lawyers when you're broke. They want money up front. And Brenda's financial situation was about as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. Tom's intelligence network had been busy. The Ridgewood Facts Facebook group now had over 100 members, including several real estate agents who'd started sharing some very interesting information about Brenda's business practices. Turns out when you systematically harass people into selling their homes below market value, word gets around the professional community pretty quickly. Her reputation's toast, Tom reported during one of our kitchen cabinet sessions. 3 agents confirmed she's been blacklisted by most brokerages in the county. Nobody wants to be associated with someone under investigation for harassment and fraud. Meanwhile, the EPA had finally responded to my detailed documentation of Brenda's wetland violations. A federal investigator named Patricia Mills arrived Tuesday morning with the kind of clipboard that means your day is about to get very expensive. The smell of fresh mud and regulatory authority filled the air as she methodically documented months of illegal dumping. "This is one of the most comprehensive evidence packages I've ever seen," she told me, reviewing my photographs and GPS coordinates. Whoever compiled this documentation really knew what they were doing. I just smiled and offered her coffee while she calculated fines that would make a lottery winner nervous. But Brenda's masterstroke of self-destruction was yet to come. Apparently deciding that subtlety was for people who weren't facing financial ruin, she scheduled an emergency HOA meeting for Friday afternoon with an agenda that would have made a Banana Republic dictator blush. Motion to emergency condemn terrorist property and authorize immediate seizure under community safety provisions. The woman was literally trying to steal my land using made-up legal authority. Susan nearly choked on her tea when she saw the meeting notice. "She's completely lost touch with reality," she said, shaking her head in amazement. "This isn't just fraud anymore. It's attempted theft using color of law. That's a federal crime." The meeting itself was a thing of beauty. Brenda had apparently expected her usual crowd of 5 board members and maybe 3 homeowners who didn't have anything better to do on a Friday afternoon. Instead, she walked into a packed community center with 87 residents, 2 reporters, Susan's legal team, and a very interested EPA investigator taking notes. Roy had set up his live streaming equipment, broadcasting the whole circus to over 400 online viewers who'd been following this suburban saga like it was their favorite reality show. Ladies and gentlemen, Brenda began, her voice shaking with what I can only describe as righteous delusion. We face an unprecedented threat to our community's safety and property values. She launched into a 20-minute presentation that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so pathetic. According to Queen Brenda, my 12 acres of cattle and vegetable gardens represented a clear and present danger to Western civilization. The smell of fierce sweat mixed with expensive perfume as she clicked through slides showing my terrorist compound from every possible angle. But the real magic happened when she called for the vote to condemn my property. All in favor of emergency seizure, she asked, looking around the room with the desperate hope of someone who'd bet everything on a pair of twos. Dead silence. Even her remaining board allies stared at their shoes, apparently having discovered some previously unknown interest in floor tiles. Motion fails for lack of a second, Susan announced from the back of the room, her voice carrying the satisfaction of a chess master delivering checkmate. That's when Brenda completely snapped. "You're all cowards," she screamed, her carefully maintained facade finally cracking like cheap paint. "He's destroyed our property values. He's made our neighborhood a laughingstock. He's ruining everything I've worked for." The taste of victory was sweeter than Sarah's homemade apple pie as I watched 8 years of carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. Brenda stormed out of her own meeting, leaving behind a room full of neighbors who'd finally seen their emperor without clothes. Patricia Mills approached me afterward with a satisfied smile. "Mr. Kowalski, I'll need you to testify when we prosecute the environmental violations. Based on tonight's performance, I don't think credibility will be an issue." The net was closing fast, and Brenda was running out of places to hide. The final showdown came on a Tuesday morning that started with unseasonable thunder and the kind of atmospheric pressure that makes smart people stay indoors. But Brenda Hawthorne had apparently moved beyond caring about omens, weather patterns, or basic survival instincts. Her lawyers had scheduled what they called a community resolution meeting at the Ridgewood Community Center, ostensibly to present a final settlement offer before taking our dispute to federal court. What they actually delivered was the legal equivalent of a suicide bombing with Brenda as both the bomber and the target. The community center filled up like a revival meeting, with every folding chair occupied and people standing 3 deep along the walls. Word had spread through social media that this was going to be the final act of our suburban drama, and nobody wanted to miss the conclusion. The smell of coffee, nervous energy, and impending justice created an atmosphere you could cut with a knife. Amy Rodriguez from the county newspaper had brought a photographer, and Roy's live stream was approaching 600 viewers before we even started. Tom Patterson sat in the front row with a satisfied smile, having organized carpools to ensure maximum community attendance. Brenda walked in flanked by her 3-lawyer demolition crew, looking like she was heading to her own execution but determined to take everyone else down with her. Her perfectly styled hair couldn't hide the wild look in her eyes, the expression of someone who'd bet everything on a losing hand and decided to flip over the poker table. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced her lead attorney, a guy who looked like he'd learned law from watching courtroom dramas, "we're here to present final terms for resolving this dispute before it proceeds to federal litigation." He clicked through a PowerPoint presentation that would have been hilarious if it wasn't so desperately sad. According to Brenda's legal team, my cattle operation violated 17 federal regulations, threatened public safety, and had personally devalued every home in a 3-mile radius. The solution: I could avoid criminal prosecution by selling my property to the HOA for $1 and relocating to somewhere more appropriate for agricultural activities. The room was dead silent, except for the sound of Roy's cameras capturing every word for posterity. That's when Susan Wren stood up from her seat in the middle section, holding a manila folder thick enough to stop a bullet. "Your Honor, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I represent Mr. Kowalski, and I'd like to present some evidence for the community's consideration." She walked to the front of the room with the confidence of someone holding a royal flush against a pair of twos. The projector screen filled with the first slide of our counter-presentation, 8 months of documented criminal activity by Brenda Hawthorne. What followed was 20 minutes of the most beautiful legal demolition I'd ever witnessed. High-def video of Brenda ramming through my gates. Timestamped photographs of illegal wetland dumping. Audio recordings of attempted bribery. Screenshots of harassment campaigns. GPS-tracked evidence of trespassing and vandalism. Each piece of evidence landed like a precision strike on Brenda's credibility. The community center filled with gasps, muttered curses, and the sound of neighbors finally understanding what they'd been living with for 8 years. But the mic drop moment came when Patricia Mills from the EPA walked through the front door, carrying an official-looking briefcase and wearing the expression of someone about to ruin somebody's entire year. "Excuse me," she announced, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "Patricia Mills, Environmental Protection Agency. I have a federal warrant for the arrest of Brenda Hawthorne on charges of illegal dumping in protected wetlands, conspiracy to commit environmental crimes, and obstruction of a federal investigation." The room exploded into chaos. Cameras flashed, people shouted, and Brenda's lawyers suddenly discovered urgent business elsewhere in the building. Through it all, Brenda sat frozen at the defense table like she'd been struck by lightning, watching 8 years of carefully constructed lies collapse in real time. Furthermore, Mills continued, producing a document that looked impressively official. Mrs. Hawthorne is being assessed $127,500 in environmental fines payable immediately, with additional penalties pending criminal prosecution. That's when Brenda finally found her voice. "This is a conspiracy," she screamed, pointing at me with a shaking finger. "He's destroyed everything. He's ruined my life. I'll make him pay for this." The taste of victory was sweeter than anything I'd ever experienced as federal agents escorted the former queen of Ridgewood Estates out of her own meeting in handcuffs. The sound of her heels clicking against linoleum for the last time, mixed with applause from 87 neighbors who'd finally seen justice served. Amy's photographer captured the perfect shot, Brenda being led away while I sat calmly in the audience, coffee mug in hand, surrounded by the community she'd terrorized for nearly a decade. Susan approached me afterward with a smile that could have powered the building. "Jake, I've been practicing law for 40 years, and I've never seen someone destroy themselves so thoroughly and so publicly." Through the community center windows, I could see storm clouds breaking apart, revealing the first glimpse of sunshine we'd had all week. Sometimes the best revenge, really, is just watching people get exactly what they deserve. 3 months after Brenda's federal arrest, I was feeding my cattle on a crisp January morning when the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of children's laughter drifting across the pasture. The new family moving into Brenda's foreclosed palace had kids who actually waved when they saw me. A refreshing change from 8 years of hostile surveillance. The criminal trial had been beautifully brief. When you commit federal crimes in high definition while already facing vehicular assault charges, your legal options narrow considerably. Brenda got 18 months probation, community service cleaning the wetlands she'd spent years polluting, and a lifetime ban from terrorizing any HOA ever again. Her real estate career ended with the satisfying finality of a perfectly engineered gate latch. The licensing board hearing lasted exactly 23 minutes. Apparently using professional credentials to harass neighbors while manipulating property values doesn't inspire regulatory confidence in your continued participation. But the real magic happened in Ridgewood Estates itself. The new HOA board, elected 3 days after Brenda's perp walk, implemented what Tom Patterson called the Never Again initiative. Monthly meetings were live-streamed, financial records posted online, and enforcement actions required written legal justification. The toxic smell of arbitrary authority was replaced by the fresh air of actual accountability. Property values soared 15% as word spread that Ridgewood had transformed from suburban dictatorship into a community where residents' rights actually mattered. Real estate agents started advertising reformed governance like it was marble countertops. And 3 families who'd fled Brenda's reign of terror moved back home. Tom became treasurer, applying 4 decades of teaching experience to finances that had been managed with all the precision of a drunken pirate's bookkeeping. His first audit uncovered $23,000 in mysterious administrative fees that coincidentally matched Brenda's mortgage payment schedule. As for me, I'd accidentally launched a second career as a homeowner rights consultant. The Supergate 2.0 video hit 3 million views, generating requests for engineering plans from frustrated property owners coast to coast. My weekend defensive property design workshops filled faster than I could schedule them, teaching people that sometimes the best defense against bullies is superior engineering. But the most meaningful development was the Sarah Kowalski Fair Housing Fund, established with settlement money from the HOA's insurance payout. The fund provided legal muscle for families fighting governance abuse, partnering with county legal aid to offer services that leveled playing fields and reminded petty tyrants that authority has limits. Year 1, 31 families helped. 0 families forced to choose between their homes and their sanity. My cattle had become neighborhood celebrities, with kids stopping by after school to share grass through the fence, and Saturday mornings attracting more volunteer feeders than I could manage. What started as grief therapy for a broken-hearted widower had evolved into community therapy for half the subdivision. The healing had even extended to my personal life. Linda, a county librarian I'd met at one of our legal clinics, shared Sarah's appreciation for quiet mornings, strong coffee, and standing up to bullies. We'd started talking about adding a few more rescue animals to the operation. Maybe some chickens. Definitely more reasons to smile at sunrise. The gate itself had achieved local landmark status, with visitors from other subdivisions making pilgrimages to see the wooden barrier that ended 8 years of suburban tyranny. I'd reinforced it one final time, not expecting more ramming attacks, but because good engineering deserves proper maintenance and symbolic gates should last forever. This morning, like every morning since Brenda's departure, I sat on my porch with steaming coffee and watched sunrise paint the pastures gold while my rescue cattle grazed in hard-earned peace. The sound of children's laughter mixed with gentle lowing and the distant hum of a community that had remembered how to be neighborly. Sarah would have loved seeing her dream finally come true. Not just the quiet ranch retirement we'd planned, but the knowledge that standing up to one bully had taught an entire neighborhood how to protect themselves from the next one. Sometimes the best victory isn't revenge. It's building something good enough to last. Drop a comment sharing your own HOA nightmare story. Let's help each other fight back against petty tyrants who think they can drive through our lives without consequences. Your stories help us document these abuses and find solutions that work. If you enjoyed watching a suburban dictator get exactly what she deserved, subscribe for more tales about ordinary people who refuse to be bulldozed by corrupt systems. Because sometimes the best way to fix what's broken is to build something stronger. Next week, the HOA president who tried to steal a veteran's inheritance using fake legal documents. That revenge involved a public auction, an angry military family, and very creative use of small claims.